Welcome to the Tim Castle Show, where I talk to courageous individuals doing inspirational things around the world. If you're someone that struggles with fear, anxiety, not knowing which direction to go, this episode's for you. We've got the master of uncertainty, Rich Diviney, former Navy SEAL, 21 years in the SEALs, Afghanistan 11 times, teaching us how to take the lessons he learned within the SEALs and apply it to your daily life. So how to turn stress into success. This is a golden episode. Rich is a big deal, and he's got a new book called Masters of Uncertainty. It's out now, and I recommend you hop on and get that book. Get it on audio, absorb the content, listen to it over and over again, and just start applying these techniques packed in this episode. These are actionable things that you can do to feel cool under pressure, to feel chill, to feel unstressed in stressful situations. Imagine being able to master that skill. That's what this episode is going to teach you. Big thanks to Rich for dropping his knowledge on the show, and we'll see you soon. Take it away, Rich Diviney. All right, my guest today needs little introduction for anyone interested in elite performance, leadership, under pressure, and mastering mindsets that separate the good from the great. Rich Diviney is a retired Navy SEAL commander who served for more than 21 years, leading countless high-stakes missions around the globe. But beyond his tactical expertise, Rich has become fascinated with what really makes some people thrive. And so, just like myself, this is all about thrive, not survive. And so for anyone looking to understand the deep qualities of elite performers, I recommend you read The Attributes, which is Rich's first book. And now he's back with a brand new book, Masters of Uncertainty, which I've been thoroughly enjoying, where he explores how to navigate and leverage the ambiguity and unpredictability that define today's world. So please welcome to the show the true master of his craft, someone who has dedicated his life to helping others unlock their potential, Rich Diviney.
Hey, Tim, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, the honor is mine. Thank you for coming on and doing this and for sharing your wisdom with our guests and listeners today.
Yeah, my
So
pleasure. Look forward to our
you've got a
conversation.
new you've got a new book out, and it's not just any book. This is Masters of Uncertainty. What a title. And then the subtitle kind of brings the second hammer. It's the Navy SEAL way to turn stress into success for you and your team. So what kind of led you to want to write this second book? I mean, obviously you've got The Attributes, which was a bestseller as well.
Yeah, interesting, Tim. This is the book I've always wanted to write, and I've had the idea for Masters of Uncertainty even before the attributes, because I've always been fascinated with what it is that allows people, and obviously specifically SEALs, but what it is allows us to do what we do and march into a kind of chaos and still perform. In the conduct of the research that I was doing, and this research lasted over a couple decades as I really gained interest in it. But in the conduct of that research, I discovered that attributes were a huge part of understanding one's ability to perform. And it just so happened that as I began to kind of think about writing my first book, the attributes seemed like a good place to start. Not only because it was kind of a very specific kind of niched topic, but it was a huge one. We have 41 in the book. I write about 25 attributes, but we have 41 attributes now. So I knew we could tackle that, and I could write about it. It was really a little bit of unconscious genius because the attributes is such a big subject, and we really kind of build an assessment tool and really dig in and dive deep on this stuff. And so that when the Masters of Uncertainty book came to fruition, I could add a chapter on the attributes and just say, hey, this is what I'm talking about. Refer to book number one. But
Right.
but ultimately, that mastering uncertainty is what I've always been really passionate about figuring out.
And there's something so good. So, I mean, I am talking to an ex-Navy SEAL here. I don't know if you can ever call it ex, right? You're a Navy SEAL at the end of the day. Like,
Former, yeah, retired, retired. Yeah.
exactly. So this is brilliant. But I think there's something that is so special about what you guys do is because under pressure, in those moments of uncertainty, you guys actually get calmer. You actually get more locked in and more focused. And I'm just so looking forward to double tapping in on that. And I think I don't want to do any spoilers here, but the beginning of the book starts off with this story around Osama bin Laden and the raid, and obviously a very famous, like everyone knows, a very famous point in history. But obviously, you had a plan, and things didn't go to plan, and then you still had to execute. And I think it'd be good to just share with the listeners a little bit more about like what it's like to be a Navy SEAL under pressure in those types of situations, and what you're really thinking about when things aren't going right that allows you to then get on and get the job done.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know we're gonna get into the details
Yeah.
of kind of the tools like shifting horizons and DPOs, but ultimately what you're thinking about is what do I need to do now? What's in this moment? What's my biggest concern? And what you'll never see Navy SEALs do is worry about that which they can't control. And so
Mm,
it's really ultimately a practice of continually asking yourself in an environment, okay, what do I know? What can I control? I'm going to focus on whatever the priority is, do that. And then once that's done, I'm going to ask myself the question again, well, now what do I know and what can I control? And it's just that over and over and over again. I know we're going to talk about that process here, but ultimately what we're talking about is the ability to move and perform and keep your brain, your frontal lobe engaged
mm.
in the process, your decision-making brain. Because when we get stressed, when we get fearful, when our amygdala gets tickled, what happens is our frontal lobe, the decision logic making part of our brain, begins to recede, and our limbic brain, our emotional center brain, our lizard brain, begins to come to the fore. And in the extreme cases, we've heard of this, amygdala hijack or autonomic overload, where the limbic brain has now taken full control. Our frontal lobe is now all receded all the way back. Our limbic brain takes control, and we are literally acting without thinking, which comes in very handy if you're jumping out of the way of a moving train or running from the bear. But in many cases, most cases in today's world, we want to actually engage our frontal lobe, our decision-making part of our brain, and to do that takes a couple different things, both an understanding and a manipulation of our autonomic arousal, plus this idea of moving horizons and breaking your environment into small, usable chunks.
Yeah, and no, you've touched upon a few nuggets of gold there. And for people listening, that we're going to jump into those. So don't worry, you will understand everything about those bits that Rich has just shared. But like, it's just phenomenal. Like the ability to be able to almost not let that hijack
Hmm.
brain and let you make those quality decisions. If we just think about all the times, not even as a Navy SEAL that this shows up, it could be an argument with your partner. How good would it be to be able to just go the opposite direction and feel completely in control?
Yeah.
So I know in the book and your philosophies, you talk about the difference between a peak performer and an optimal performer. And I thought this was really cool because there's tons of coaches out there that all are aiming for peak performance. And people, when you ask them, they're perhaps thinking that they need to be a peak performer as that's what they're aiming for. But you have a very cool distinction around
Yeah.
this difference between the two.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, peak performance is, well, I'll start by people. When I was thinking about this, people were always saying, "Yo, you Navy SEALs are the ultimate peak performers," and I used to disagree with that because peak performance by definition is an apex. Peak by definition is an apex, and
Mm,
there's only one place you can go from an apex. That's down. The other thing about peak performance is that it often has to be planned for and scheduled and prepared for. So the professional football player plans and schedules his or her entire week so they can peak for 3 hours on game day. We don't get to do that. Navy SEALs don't get to do that. None of us get to do that unless or you're a pro athlete and you're not telling us. But we have to perform with what we've got in the moment. And so optimal performance, I used to say we're optimal performance. Optimal performance means we are going to do our very best in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment. Now, sometimes our best in the moment looks like peak, and it's flow states and everything's clicking and everything's awesome, everything's cool. But sometimes our best in the moment is I am literally head down, slogging it out, going step by step, and it's dirty and it's gritty and it's ugly and it's hard. And that is still performing optimally. And so optimal performance allows us to think about the performance as this umbrella underneath which peak lives and gutting it out lives and even recovery lives. And we're constantly modulating ourselves because a couple things happen there. A couple important things about optimal performance. First of all, it allows us to celebrate those times when we are not at peak, which is important. But it also allows us to do what I call responsible energy management. In other words, I don't need to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. I can manage
Mm.
my energy. One of the things you'll see, or your audience might see when they watch all the TV shows and movies about Navy SEALs, they might see a group of SEALs getting ready to go do a mission, and right before they run out to the helicopter, they all kind of huddle up and they're hoo-yawing and high-fiving and all that stuff. That never happens ever. Okay. In fact, most of the time we'd be in our helicopters flying into combat, and the guys around me would be asleep. They'd be napping. And
Mm.
there's a reason for that. Is because we're not going to waste an ounce of our energy doing things we don't need to do. We're constantly modulating our energy levels. We don't know what's coming. We don't know how long we're going to be out there. So we're constantly modulating our energy levels so that we can actually effectively produce and perform at whatever the situation needs. And so optimal performance just allows us a lot more flexibility in the way we perform on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So there's two things there. One was celebrate the fact that
Celebrate those
you're
times
doing.
when it's literally you are gutting it out, and it's dirty and
Yeah.
it's gritty and it's ugly and it's hard. Because that's still performing optimally. That's one. And then
Mm.
two is modulate your energy levels. You don't have to be 100%. If you try to peak all the time, you're going to burn out. Just like if you try to run a car's engine at 100% all the time, it's going to burn out or anything like that. So we are an engine in of ourselves. We can't expect to run at peak all the time. So manage it.
I think this is something you linked in just this has sparked an idea, but in chapter two
Yeah.
around not necessarily there's a myth that you've got to burn out and you've got to go hard. The grit myth, I believe it was, or something around
Yeah.
grit, and the fact that that's not actually true, that you shouldn't be just flogging yourself silly to try and
Yeah.
get to
Yeah.
success.
Yeah, no, the grit myth, it just speaks to this idea that a lot of people think that the accomplishment or achievement of anything, especially a long term or a goal of any sort, requires just a constant fight. I'm just going
Mm.
to fight through it. I'm going to and the fact is, every goal is going to require some effort and in some cases a fight. But depending on the distance, depending on the length of time required to accomplish that goal, your energy has to be managed. And so that energy management will and has to include those times when you're running at full speed, those times when you're gutting it out, and those times where you're building in for recovery. So it's a dance and it's a balance of energy that one has to embark upon, not just I'm just going to gut it out and make it happen. You'll burn out. You won't make it. So
And I think that's really important, right? Not just from like an athletic or an endurance perspective, not just from sort of a terrorist perspective or a war zone perspective, but entrepreneurs, right? They're massively doing that kind of situation right now where they believe that the right thing that they've got to do because the cash flow is burning and all the investors are wanting a return and they've got to get their product out and they've got to make headway and you see it. I see it day in, day out. I see people burning out, walking away from situations that they once fought really hard to get into. And then they're doing exactly
yeah,
what you're saying here. The expectation of perfection is too high. They're looking for that apex and they are
yeah,
trying to summit the whole time. So brilliant stuff that
yeah.
Rich. Just pointing out that optimal performance is and I guess relating that back, I've heard you speak a number of times on being an Navy SEAL and a lot of your missions were gritty, they were dirty, they were grungy, they didn't always go to plan. Like it wasn't always just in flow state, right? This is just getting your head down, like you say, and getting the job done.
That's right.
That's
That's
the
right.
purpose. So in the book, you talk about the mastering uncertainty method.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? And like what can you do to practice how you can stay calm in the moment, like when you're in that uncertainty?
Well, the mastering uncertainty method is really a method that involves kind of, I guess, six things, six parts. Three of which address our very human neurology and physiology. So in other words, the first three are ubiquitous to all human beings. We all have the ability to do this because we all have the same physiology and neurology. And then the second three things are those things that we bring uniquely into an environment, those things that are unique to us that we bring into environments of uncertainty, challenge, and stress. And so what I do in the books, I break down each of those, and we can talk about each of those as we move forward. But that first part is really centered around what is it about our brain that we have to understand is happening when we are facing uncertainty, challenge, and stress and fear, kind of specifically, and how do we manage through that, and how do we do that?
Right. Yeah. And I do love, like, when everything's spinning around, we like to think about, you're talking about this, we like to think we'd rise to the level of our training, but
Yeah.
actually we don't. We revert back down to like this core wiring. And I
Basic.
think you talk a lot about rewiring as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we revert to our most raw, right? Our raw self. And so part of that is unique in terms of what we bring
Mm,
in. And we'll get to that. But the first part we have to understand is we have to understand how our brain works. And this gets into kind of the most important tool that I talk about in the book called moving horizons. And moving
mm,
horizons is really a way we can, in fact, manage our brain and work with our own brain to generate certainty in an environment. Just to give you kind of a broad brush, a good friend of mine is Andrew Huberman. He's a doctor, he's a neuroscientist, has a great, very popular podcast. And he and I have known each other for 7 or 8 years. And even before the podcast, we were working on this stuff together. And one of the things we discovered and hypothesized really is that fear is a combination of two factors. And those factors are uncertainty plus anxiety. Uncertainty plus anxiety equals fear. Because you can have one or the other and not necessarily a fear. You can be uncertain. Well, you can be anxious without being uncertain. That's like I have to give a presentation next week at work. I know the presentation. I know the people I'm giving it to. There's no
mm.
uncertainty there. I'm just a little anxious. No big deal. Um, no fear. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve. We know there's no fear there. Okay, when you combine the two is when you get fear. And this is what we're talking about. It's the fear factor that actually seeds itself negatively oftentimes into our ability to perform. So the way we buy down that fear is we buy down those two factors. We buy down uncertainty, we buy down anxiety, or we buy down either one or both. Okay. To buy down uncertainty is this first part we'll talk about. And it's this idea of moving horizons. What we have to understand is when our brain is trying to make certain our environment or understand our environment, it's doing so amongst or with regard to three important factors. Probably a few more, but three primary factors. Those factors are duration, how long it's going to last, pathway, what's my route in, out, or through, and then outcome. What's the end state here? If we are in absence of one or more of those three factors, we begin to feel that anxiousness, uncertainty, that fear that's bubbling up, that uncertainty is bubbling up. So we'll just take an example of I usually use illness as an example. An illness such as like strep throat. Strep throat is an illness we all know. It's a known illness. Most people don't die of strep throat today in today's environment because we also have an antibiotic for strep throat. We have something you could take, a cure for
Mm.
strep throat. So if we get strep throat, we are in absence of only one of the three factors. In other words, we know the pathway, the antibiotic, and we know the outcome. We're going to get better. What we're in absence of is how long, the duration, because you may respond to antibiotics a little bit differently than I do. So our uncertainty, anxiety level is mild. Now let's take the flu, which is also a known illness. We also know that most people in today's world don't die from the flu. But there's no known cure for the flu. There's nothing we can take. There's a lot of people who have ideas, but there's no known thing you can take for the flu. There's no medicine. So if we get the flu now, we are in absence of two of the three. Okay, we know the outcome, we're going to get better, but we don't know the pathway and we don't know the duration. So our uncertainty anxiety level is moderate. Now imagine a disease shows up and we've never seen it before. Some people are dying from it, some people are not dying from it. There's no known cure or vaccine, and we don't know how long this is going to spread across the planet. This entered 2020. This is COVID for all of us in
Right.
2020. Okay. And we were all in absence of all three of those: duration, pathway, and outcome, which is why all of our anxiety levels was heightened at a heightened level. So all this to say, what Moving Horizons does is Moving Horizons allows you to generate certainty in your environment by creating your own duration, pathway, outcome. You pick a horizon, you pick something to focus on that you know and can control. You create, in doing so, you create a duration, pathway, outcome, and then you execute that. A simple example would be SEAL training. In Navy SEAL training, you spend hundreds of hours running around with big, heavy boats on your head, right? And you just it's insane how much you run with these boats, you know. And I remember it was during Hell Week, and it was 3 in the morning. And we were running with this damn boat, and it was on the beach, and we were next to a sand berm, and we were all miserable. And I remember saying to myself, you know what? I'm just focus on getting to the end of this sand berm. And what I did in that moment inadvertently was I picked a horizon and in doing so created a DPO, duration pathway outcome.
Mm.
Duration from now until end of sandberm, pathway from here to end of sandberm, and outcome end of sandberm. Now, what I was also doing neurologically was I was manipulating my dopamine system by giving myself a small goal, I generated enough dopamine to actually get me there because dopamine's a motivation chemical. And I generated a reward of dopamine when I accomplished the goal. And so this moving horizons process allows us to pick something to focus on and then move to it. And then once we get there, we get a dopamine reward and we come back out and we ask the question again. And you can basically do the cycle over and over and over again until one of three things happens. Either you accomplish the overall goal, you move through the challenge, uncertainty, and stress, or you generate enough certainty in your environment so that there's no more uncertainty there. Because as we move, so theoretically, as we move into that environment, we're going to generate our cone of certainty should open up. Not all the time, but sometimes. So you could just do that over and over again. And so this moving horizons process is really the primary tool that one can use to start stepping through any environment, but specifically uncertainty, challenge, and stress. And the good news is every human being has probably done this before. Now, maybe not in uncertainty, but certainly if you work out, many of us who are in the gym or go to the workout, we're not thinking about the whole workout when we go to the gym. We're like, I'm just going to focus on one set at a time. We're doing this. Or if we're in a meeting or whatever, we've all chunked our environment in certain ways. All we're doing is, in this case, is we're taking more control of this process and deliberately doing it in uncertainty, challenge, and stress.
That last sentence is everything. That last sentence is everything because that's exactly the part where your lizard brain comes out and you forget to do all of that. So dopamine's really important. Got that. Are there any best practices that we should do when we're setting our DPO? Right. If we're
Yeah.
thinking about that, like, because okay, I get that I've got to get these three parts to make it useful. But what would be
Yeah.
a best practice if someone was going to implement that in their life?
Yeah, the horizons that one picks is it's very subjective to both that person and the intensity of the environment. In other words, the more intense the environment, often the shorter the horizon has to be. I remember just in SEAL training, they throw you in the surf zone and you're freezing for hours, right? And it's miserable. Most people quit during that time frame. And I remember just saying to myself, I'm going to count 5 waves. That was my horizon in the moment.
Mm.
Sometimes my horizon was I'm going to wait till the next meal. Sometimes my horizon was get to the next sandberm. What we have to understand is when we do this horizon picking and setting these DPOs, we're manipulating dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that tells us this is good, keep doing this. It also motivates us. They've discovered that dopamine is what gets us out of bed in the morning. And when we pick a horizon that's too big or too far away, what happens is we actually run out of dopamine before we get there, and that's why we quit. Whenever we quit anything, it's because we've run out of dopamine. If we pick a horizon that's too short, then we don't actually register enough of a reward to make it feel good. So the way we practice this, so the answer to your question is it's entirely subjective to the human being. The good news is we can actually practice this and we can change it along the way. In other words, we can be in an environment or situation where we pick a horizon, and as we're moving towards it, we're like, oh, shoot, that's too long. That's too far. And we pull that horizon back in. Okay. We can also pick a horizon that's too short and we're like, oh, that didn't feel anything. I gotta do better. I gotta pick a longer horizon. So it's a very, very subjective process. But the good news is we can manipulate it as we go. We can get good at picking these things. And we can do it over and over again. And we can also practice this process in certain environments. Okay, we can do this anywhere. Like just like I said, the gym is not an uncertain environment, but you can practice it in the gym. The office, in certain cases, is not an uncertain environment, but you can practice it in the office. And so we can exercise this muscle in any place we want to. And then that way, the better you get at it, the more natural it'll be for you when the you know what actually hits the fan.
Hmm. I love that. So you can calibrate it based on know
Yeah,
yourself, know who you are, know what you want to do, chunk down the problem into smaller tasks, set the right horizon threshold. You could even
yeah,
like manipulate it then to apply this to things that if you have a goal and you start being able to attribute or manipulate yourself so that you can get dopamine from doing the thing like writing a book, right? You know that it's a long process. If you thought about the macro and you're like, how am I going to structure this book versus I'm going to write 2,000 words a day, and you get
yeah,
dopamine because you did
yeah,
it, then you get into that. Or Duolingo, right? When you're training for language and it's giving you those little dopamine hits. And I know that's in the design of the product, but you could almost do that to yourself, right? You could
yes.
set yourself up so that you're doing things you know you should do or you need to do, not just in those uncertain times. That's
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we're constantly doing to ourselves. I mean, we are manipulating our own dopamine constantly. I mean, we're letting things manipulate our dopamine, so that's
right,
probably more the latter than the former. But
right.
yeah, this is completely under our control. So
But is that working against us as well? People are like understanding the importance of dopamine, the fact that us as humans, if we're saying we're quitting essentially because we've run out of dopamine because the horizon was too far, or like there are obvious things I'm thinking about now, just coming into my mind of dopamine stimulators that are
mhm.
almost depleting our dopamine. And that's the
Yeah.
thing we need to keep focused. And then you were saying like Navy SEALs are asleep because they're maintaining their battery. It's like trying to put all these parts together to go, look, there's things out there that's going to absorb your dopamine, which is giving you less power to go towards achieving your goals.
Yeah, and you're 100% right now. I mean, again, I'm not a neuroscientist, and so this is really just layman's terms and what I've researched and read. But it is certainly the case that we are and have available to us um, devices, our phone, our TikTok, whatever it is, that really that negatively manipulate our dopamine. In other words, it uh, it it reduces our the ability for us to go distance because
Mhm.
the dopamine hits are so quick. And so now the question becomes, does context matter? And I think it does. In a different context, there's different levels of dopamine that are being induced depending on the human being. But I would say that I would encourage anybody to understand what they are doing to their system when they are watching their TikTok or their YouTube shorts and things like that. And not is the answer is not don't do it, but the answer is just understand what's going on and don't get yourself into a cycle where it's just depleting, 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 because you will feel unmotivated. So
Are you in sales, business development? Are you a leader taking a new team and project forward? That's why I want to introduce you to my new book, The First Domino, coming out in a couple of months. Land your first flagship client, take asymmetric risk, and build leverage into your sales process. This is an implementable guide. Read it on the weekend, implement on Monday. This is all about action execution and the mindset that you need to adopt to land your first domino, your first flagship client, to push that product out to the world and to become differentiated. Once you learn these skills, and I'm very, very proud of this book because this is 15 years of knowledge packed into a playbook that you can apply, whether it's launching a new product, whether it's going out into a new market, whether it's joining a new company and wanting to show revenue impact within your first 90 days. We're going to show you how to land your first client in 90 days or under. And this can be your biggest client yet because you get that domino effect. You start a chain reaction of success, and I look forward to your bigger, better future. So come on, grab a copy now, order it now so you don't forget. This book will change you as a salesperson, as a business leader, and as an ambitious go-getter. So this book is my best yet, and it's going to change the world. So you don't want to get behind. Read The First Domino now. Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Switching gears slightly, thinking about this from a team perspective, and then thinking about like some of the principles that you taught in the book. You come up with the concept of dynamic subordination, which I thought was incredible because, and we can go into that in a little bit, but like I think from an organizational perspective, how does being in a SEAL team compare to when you, I'm assuming, go into organizations, see how they're structured, see how they're working together, like, and this concept of dynamic subordination to almost get that flow.
yeah, so dynamic subordination is what we need, how we need to think about the task organization structure for high performing teams, whether it be a SEAL team or any high performing team. And when we start thinking about how the highest performing teams move through this process of operating uncertainty, the primary way they do it is because they task organize properly. And what I mean by that is the high performing team is not, if you were kind of to draw this on a chart or a flip chart or a whiteboard, the task org chart does not look like a pyramid. It does not look like a flat line. It doesn't even look like an upside down pyramid. Okay, what it looks like is a blob or an amoeba. And that
Mm.
blob or amoeba, in that blob or amoeba, the leader is wherever the leader needs to be in the moment. And that's what dynamic subordination is. Dynamic subordination means or implies that a team understands that challenges and issues and problems can come from any angle at any moment. And when one does, the person who's closest to that problem and the most capable immediately steps up and takes lead. And then everybody supports and follows. And then the environment shifts and someone else steps up and takes lead and everybody supports and follows. So it's also, I call it, so it's a dynamic swap between leader and follower. I also call it alpha hopping. That alpha position hops to wherever it needs to be. And so what this tells us is something really important, and that is that in a high performing team, your position in a high performing team has nothing to do with your rank or hierarchy. It has everything to do with what you are there to contribute to the team. And so the way we create dynamically subordinating teams is we start to understand each other to very deep levels. We understand our attributes, our identities. We build trust so that we can dynamically move through stress, challenge, uncertainty. Because what's happening in the team environment, in a dynamically subordinating environment, is the person who's closest to the problem is setting the initial horizon, setting the first
Hmm.
DPO. Everybody's moving to that, and then the environment might shift, and someone else is now setting the next horizon, and it's just constant swap in between who's setting the horizons and who's setting the DPOs. And that's how the highest performing teams operate and start putting this into effect.
So deep levels of trust then between everyone and deep levels of understanding. What would you
Yeah.
say about composure? Like, how can someone become more composed, like within
Yeah.
that environment?
So that gets into the second part of this physiology, neurology, and it requires an understanding of our autonomic arousal, and what's happening as we feel fear and we start getting stressed and anxious. So one of the things, so let's talk about the anxiety piece. So uncertainty plus anxiety equals fear, right? So let's talk about anxiety. First of all, we have to reshape or redefine, or I guess reframe anxiety. Anxiety is quite literally fiction. That's all it is, all right? Because anxiety, now the stress induced from anxiety is present, it's real, but anxiety is literally worrying about something that's in the future that that hasn't happened yet. So while the past is history, the future is fiction. And anytime you're anxious about something, you're looking ahead, you're projecting what you think is going to happen, and you become anxious about it. One thing you'll never see Navy SEALs do, like I said before, is worry about stuff that they can't control. We don't worry about things in the future if we can't control it in the moment. That does not preclude proper planning. Of course, we do some proper planning. So we say, hey, if this happens, if X happens, we'll do Y or whatever. But once it's planned, we say, hey, we're gonna deal with what happens in the moment. So first, we reframe anxiety. All right. Now, the other thing we do is we understand what that anxiety is doing in terms of our physiology. It's stressing us. Our autonomic arousal is going up. Our frontal lobe is starting to recede. Okay. Our amygdala is getting tickled. There's some physiological things that are happening as a result of that. Our vision, for example, is starting to tunnel. Okay, when we start to get an autonomic arousal and we start to get stressed and fearful, our vision tunnels in. It's nature's way of making us focus in on the threat. Our breathing gets much more rapid and short and shallow. Okay, so there's respiratory things that are happening. There's visual things that are happening. We can, in fact, reverse the process through respiratory tools and visual tools. All right. A visual tool that I talk about several in the book, but one that's pretty cool is this idea of open gaze. Open gaze is simply, or soft gaze. This is just simply if you were to stare out straight in front of you, and instead of staring at a thing or a point, you soften your gaze, so you're just kind of taking in the whole environment. If you were to kind of put your hands out to your side, you could see the peripheries. This is called open gaze, and this has been proven to, in fact, decrease our autonomic arousal, bring our autonomic arousal down because we're not focused in anymore. Okay, this is also why sitting on a beach or looking at a mountainscape calms us because we're actually in open gaze. So visually, we can actually induce this stuff. I started doing this when I began public speaking, and I was really nervous about it because obviously, as a Navy SEAL, you don't do a lot of public speaking, and so if I was nervous or about it or slightly anxious when I got up on stage, I would just simply look at the back of the room and open my aperture, just go in soft gaze, right, and feel myself calming down. That's a visual tool. Respiratorily, we can do this. We can start breathing in a way that calms us. One of the best tools for this, and I talk about in the book, I talk about many in the book, but is the physiological sigh. The physiological sigh is literally this idea that we're blowing out carbon dioxide and we're calming ourselves. This is just simply a very deep breath in, a top off, and then a very slow exhale out. And you just do that over and over again, 5, 6, 7 times. Deep in, top off, slow exhale out. Okay, five, six, seven times of that, you're going to feel yourself calming down. And what's happening is your autonomic arousal is coming down, your frontal lobe is coming back online and allowing you to engage in your environment and begin picking horizons. You know, some people I will concede that some people get so stressed that it's hard for them to even pick a horizon because they're because their frontal lobe is starting to really go to the back there. Your first horizon can be I'm going to take 5 breaths or I'm going to take 10 breaths so that you can calm yourself and then bring your frontal lobe back online and then say, okay, what do I know can I control? What do I need to focus on? So managing your autonomic arousal is the key to actually maintaining composure and calm. If we are leaders in an environment, we all know stress and fear is contagious because but what we don't recognize or remember is so is calm. Calm is also contagious. If you and I are flying on an airplane and we start hitting heavy turbulence, okay, and we look over at the flight attendants and they are cowering in the corner crying, you and I are going to be stressed, okay?
Yeah.
However, we look over at the flight attendants and they're just calmly having a conversation, we're going to feel calmer. And so we have to recognize that doing this for ourselves will in fact help those around us. So that's why mastering it for ourselves does in fact help in team environments or in family environments because our calm is contagious, can help others maintain calm and composure as well.
That is huge. That's huge. And we see that, right? We see when leaders almost pass the stress down the chain.
Mhm.
They get a bad call or they get a lot of pressure from their boss and then it just flows straight down. And they haven't done that for themselves. And then the team suffers as a result versus that calm is transcended and then they go on to perform a lot better than they would have done. So
Yeah.
that's one thing then, being able to teach your team these specific tools, both visually and respiratory tools in the moment. Because I know that public speaking was something that I used to fear as well in that sense. And now it's become a lot more fun, but it's things like the things that you point out in your book that do really help. Just
Yeah.
being able to almost, yeah, take in the expanse of that stage and that audience, but right at the back there. So you've got it all there, and then it becomes a lot less daunting. And then,
Yeah.
like you say, you've got the uncertainty is decreased because you can think about the outcome. You know the duration, and because you've controlled how it's going to go, the delivery, like the pathway, you've got all
Yeah.
the pieces, and that can help you feel more in control. I think is that
Yeah.
is that what we're really fighting for here? Is it the lack of control or is it the overwhelm? What's the thing that can
Well,
spin us out?
yeah, it's a little bit of both. It really is. I mean, what we're fighting, to be quite simple, to be quite plain, is we're fighting uncertainty and we're fighting anxiety. And we're basically deliberately buying down each of those. And by doing so, you're buying down or getting rid of your fear. People have asked me before, were there any times in your career where you were really afraid? Like, there's a lot of fear. And I answer them very honestly and say no. And I don't do that because of arrogance or machismo. I do that because in those moments where things were really chaotic, all we were doing was focusing on the problem in front of us. We didn't have time to be afraid. We were focusing on one thing after another after another. We were basically picking horizons and we're buying down anxiety. And so fear was going away. I saw Buzz Aldrin interviewed by someone who was asking him when he and Neil Armstrong were first landing on the moon. I mean, no one but done this before. I mean, there were so many things that could go wrong. And they said, "Were you afraid?" And he was like, "I wasn't afraid. I was just working what I needed to work in the moment. I was doing exactly what I
Mm.
needed to do because he was doing this horizon shifting." A great example of this, and kind of a Navy SEAL example, is that we've done on occasion some very uh, insane skydive operations, right? So one of the things we do is called HAHO, high altitude, high opening skydiving, right? So we go out so the plane goes up to about 20,000 feet. We jump out of the plane at 20,000 feet, and then we count to four and pull our parachute. So you're opening up around 19,000 feet, and you're flying your parachute to an unknown drop zone, landing at a drop zone, and then that's when you start your mission, right? So you patrol into you start and this is always done at night. I mean, you train sometimes during the day, but your ultimate goal is do it at night. So you have night vision, you have tons of gear, you have oxygen because you can't, you don't have enough oxygen to
Super
breathe up
high.
there. You don't want to pass out. So it's a huge evolution. And I remember talking to a couple of my buddies, and we were talking about one of these things we were doing, and it was a huge operation. We were doing hey-ho insertion to a mission, to an unknown drop zone, to a target, big thing. And I remember my buddy saying, he said, all I can think about is when that ramp opened up. There was only one thing I was thinking. And we were like, what you thinking? He's like, nail the exit. And we're like, exactly. All
Hmm.
right. Because all of us, because if you don't nail the exit, if you don't exit that plane in a stable body position, your parachute's not going to open properly. And that was a whole other host of problems, right? So in front of us was this enormous mission. I mean, so much. I mean, everything from Al Qaeda to, I mean, everything. And none of us were thinking about anything other than nail the exit. And as soon as you nail the
Hmm.
exit, pull my parachute. As soon as you pull the parachute, get on heading. So you're not afraid in that moment, even though I didn't like skydiving because it scared me. Okay. In those moments, I was simply doing what I had to do in the moment. It was buying down that fear. And so this is a way we do it. We're taking away that fear by buying down uncertainty or buying down anxiety. And yes, in essence, we're taking control, but part of control is giving us certainty. So
It's sort of like a compartmentalization of the issue or
it's exactly that. It's exactly that. Yeah.
that's incredible. And why would someone quit something like Buds? Is that where you get that experience? Is that where this skill
Yeah.
is practiced over and over again so that it's just who you are? It's automatic, right?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the guys who make it through SEAL training are we all show up on day one with an ability to do this to a degree, and then it just gets hyper developed. But you cannot make it through SEAL training without being able to do this to a very, very nth degree in very, very extreme environments. And so they began doing exit interviews with guys who basically quit, who DOR, dropped on request, it's called. They started doing exit interviews with these guys, which is smart. They should have been doing it for years, but but they've been doing it. And in nine cases out of 10, these guys were saying things like, "Yeah, we were doing this thing. We had been doing it for hours, and all I could think about was we had to do it for so many hours more or so many days. They couldn't see an end. They could not break it into a chunk. And so one of the crucibles, I know you know a lot about SEAL training. I'm not sure if your audience does, but one of the crucibles in SEAL training is Hell Week. Hell Week is kind of the big week during first phase. It's the fifth week of training. You start on a Sunday and you go until the following Friday. Okay. And during that entire time, you only sleep for about 2.5 hours for the entire week. Okay. You're constantly cold, wet, and sandy. You're running with these boats. That's where you get most quitters during Hell Week.
Hmm.
And the saying when you go through Hell Week as a student is, if you think about Friday on Monday, you will quit because it's
Right.
too much. It's too big, right? And I mean, Hell Week was so. I mean, you're just constantly. I didn't think about Friday until Friday. I mean, and
Yeah.
then and even then it was still chunking. So yes, the answer is you have to have some predisposition to be able to do this, to even start making it through buds. But the guys who make it through, you master this, and we can do it in very extreme environments right off the bat, and you can trust that it can be done. And so that's really one of the secrets to making it through.
Man, such a core tenet. Yeah, you say in the book, the heart of unease in uncertain times often lies in the void of not knowing. It's like
Yeah. Right.
you're bringing clarity to yourself by chunking it down and then being able to execute in the moment, get the dopamine. That gives you the power to go forward. You can then crush the next thing and so on and so forth. There's another part that you talk about, which is ask better questions of
Yes.
yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because your thoughts are influenced by you all the time. Like,
Well, it's
what should we
it's
be asking ourselves? Like, what are we doing and what should we do, really?
Well, so this again, this ties into the what we have to understand about our neurology and our brains. Our brains are question answering machines because our brains are always trying to make certain our environment. They're trying to understand our environment, and it's doing so often unconsciously by asking questions. Have I seen this before? What is that? Where have I seen it before? How does this work? What we have to understand is our frontal lobe, our conscious mind, does the same thing. If we place a question into our frontal lobe, our brain has no choice but to begin to come up with answers. The problem is a lot of us do this the wrong way. We ask ourselves questions like, why am I so bad at this? Or what's wrong with me? Or why are these people out to get me? Or why am I so pissed off? If you ask yourself why you're so pissed off, you will come up with some spectacular answers as to why you're pissed off, regardless of whether you want to. So asking better questions is simply a technique that all high performers that I've ever experienced understand, and we take conscious control of the questions we're asking ourselves and ask better ones. Um, What am I good at? Who's out there that can help me? What can I control and know in this moment? I mean, you ask these questions and you will begin to come up with answers. Your brain will seek those answers. And so by changing the quality of the question we ask, we change the quality of the answer, we change the quality of the trajectory. It is the secret to moving horizons because the step one of moving horizons is what do I know? What can I control? And you are then prioritizing that thought process and you're asking yourself questions that your brain's going to answer versus why does this happen to me? Or, or what's going wrong? Whatever that is, whatever is not helpful is a lot of times what people default to. Um, Top performers always default to the better question and therefore get the better answer.
That's perfect. That's so cool because you can apply that in multiple contexts. And if you just created the habit of I'm going to ask much better questions than I automatically have been doing or subliminally have been doing and recognize and draw awareness to that. So there's another part that if we think about transforming stress, right? Stress, you talk about it, it's a lot of time associated with uncertainty, but how can we use stress as a source of energy to get things done, to go forward and to crush it?
Yeah, stress, by reframing it. Okay, so one of the things we have to
Mhm.
understand about stress is nature's way of getting us up and moving. Okay, our body feels stressed, our physiology feels stressed because something is telling us do get up and move, right? When we're hungry, we feel stressed, and that's telling us go find food. When we're lonely, we feel stressed, it's telling us go find companionship. And so by reframing stress, we start to understand our relationship with it a little bit better. What we don't want to do is over-index and let it physiologically take us over, or find ourselves in a position where we're stressed all the time, or most
Right.
of the time. But stress gets us moving. Stress is designed to, as is fear. Fear is also it's nature's risk assessment tool. It's what allows us to say, wait a second, there's a threat here, pay attention. So fear is actually a good thing. And I always used to say, one of my favorite commanding officers when I was young officer said, "Hey, Rich, always beware the fearless leader because that person's going to get you killed." I never wanted to see fearlessness because fearlessness meant that someone was running in too fast. Fearlessness often implied complacency, and so fear gets us focused, gets us thinking. We don't want to get rid of it, but we don't also want it to stall or debilitate us in any way.
Right. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. It gets you into it. Right. Okay. So what lessons from Navy SEAL leadership translate best or least into corporate environments? If we think about the lessons from Navy SEALs.
Well, I think the good news is I think a lot of this applies to corporate teams because this is team stuff, and every team, whether it's a corporate team or a SEAL team or an athletic team, has one commonality, and that's humans. So this is all very human stuff.
Hmm.
And if we want to understand how we can operate and team with humans, we have to start thinking about all these concepts. So for me, it's exciting because all of this translates very easily to whatever team you're on. And by the way, team can also be a marriage. Team can be a group of friends on a
Mm.
trip, right? Teams are everywhere. It's any group of two or more people working together towards a common goal or objective. And so all of this applies to all of it, which is exciting because it translates very easily.
And because obviously you're a master of uncertainty, what sort of one decision you've had to make in a split second that's been the toughest decision, but you knew was the right decision?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm not sure if I could. I'd have to probably think about that to get a detailed answer. But what I would say is that anytime we were overseas in combat, we always understood that the environment could shift and change at any given moment. And so as a leader or as the guy in charge, I was always poised to try to execute whatever was going to be required in the moment. And I think that for me meant keep calm, keep an open mind,
Mm.
understand what we're doing, keep communication open as much as possible, communicate, let and allow for communication to happen as abundantly as possible, because without it, you're not going to have the information you need. And then, of course, imbue and empower trust and action in those in my span of care. There was most of the time, I would say most of the time, the situation involved someone else, and they had to be empowered to make the decision and act. And my job as a leader was to make sure they knew they were empowered and they had all the resources that they could bring to bear on that. So my job was always empowering the team to, in fact, make the decisions and set the course, because that's where most of the decision making was going to be made. I, of course, had my own position on the team, and if something in the strategic kind of big picture realm came up, I would make that decision. But it's really about empowering those around you to make those decisions, so the team can move as fast and as efficiently as possible.
Man, this has just been, thank you. This has been such a masterclass in how to deal with uncertainty. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs, there's a lot of business people and folks that are in elite positions in terms of athletics that listen to this show. And I think they'll have taken a lot. The last question on this, Rich, is essentially around staying cool, right? Being cool in the moment, being present, being locked in. And as you're a Navy SEAL, you're walking through life now, you've transitioned into obviously a completely different path than going into war zones. But
Yeah.
what attributes do you take with you into that world now that you know came from the training you received as a Navy SEAL and some of the experiences you've been through? Because I just want the people on this show to understand the depth of experience that you have here. And the fact is, I know you call out not necessarily being a superhero or people are human, and that you've mentioned this a lot on the show, but what could they pick up today in order to stay cool and calm and collected and present in the moment on things that are stressing them right now?
Well, the good news is that all of the attributes that one carries with them in any environment, they translate across contexts to different environments. So things like courage and adaptability and resilience and compartmentalization and situation awareness, all super necessary in the steel world. They're just as necessary in the entrepreneurial world. As my wife and I build a business together, that's what we need. We need to be able to chunk our environment. We need to be able to step into our discomfort and fear. We need to be adaptable because that's what's required. So now I think there might be certainly in my case some more empathy that's required, and maybe some a little bit more social awareness, just because in the SEAL world we're all fairly hegemonic, at least mentally. We're all from different backgrounds, but we all deal with things kind of the same way. And when you get out in the civilian world, you're going to deal with different types of people. You have to be
Mm.
cognizant of that. So I think there's growth and insights and learning to be done there. But the good news is any attribute stack that we have translates across contexts. It's really the key is knowing what attribute stack you have.
So, Rich, thank you again for coming on, for sharing your wisdom. For there's just so much here people can apply to leadership teams and to mental toughness, performance, but also just that distinction between peak performance and optimal performance. Masters of Uncertainty, it's out now. How can people reach you? Where should they be going to get in touch? And what next steps should they be taking?
Yeah, I think the kind of the one-stop shop would be our website. So www theattributes.com. So it's the attributes.com. There you can find both books there. You can find our assessment tool and everything we do with businesses and teams. And also you can find there I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. So Rich_Diviney on Instagram, and then I think Rich Diviney on LinkedIn. So yeah, check us out, send us notes, and contact us and check out the stuff. We'd be happy to for anybody to kind of dig into it and dive into it. So
Rich, I've been totally blessed to have you on the show today. And thank you for your humility and compassion in coming on and your graciousness for sharing all of the insights and your wisdom here. It really has touched thousands of people's lives. And I know, let's send some love to Rich. Let's get the book. Let's get Masters of Uncertainty. Let's take the assessment. Get both books. They will change your life. That's the message here today. And if you like this show, please like and subscribe, and please go to Rich's website and figure out everything he's got for you.